When should you do an exercise one arm or one leg at a time? When should you do a single arm triceps extension instead of a two arm triceps extension? What about split squats? Should you do them or should you do two-legged squats? And how about a single arm D handle pull down as opposed to the traditional two arm lat pull down? I have two big picture answers to each of these questions. The first is a little bit shorter, and the second one is longer and will be the topic of this video. So the first answer is that you should use one arm or one-legged exercises when you want to. If you enjoy those exercises more than their alternatives, then those are the exercises that you should do more of. Ultimately, growing muscle, getting stronger is a matter of compliance to the gym. So to some degree, you need to make sure you're just doing exercises that you enjoy. Answer number two, this is the longer one, is that it depends. So you can think about this video like a masterclass in one leg, one arm training. And by the end of the video, you'll have a really detailed, nuanced understanding of the differences between doing things one side and two sides, and more specifically, when you should do things more likely on one side than two sides, and why you might be doing that in the first place. So before diving into specifics, I just want to make sure we have a very common language here so that we don't get confused about terms. First of all, when we say the word unilateral, what we mean is training one side of the body at a time. This could be, a single arm triceps extension. This could be a single leg extension, or a single arm curl, or a single arm pull down. Those are the truest forms of unilateral exercise options. And then on the other hand, we have bilateral options. Bilateral options involved using both sides of the body at the same time. So this could be a two-arm rope triceps push down. This could be a two-arm pull down. This could be a two-leg extension, a normal barbell back squat. Anytime you're using both sides of your body at the same time, that's considered bilateral. Now, one more term that may occasionally come up in this conversation elsewhere on the internet is this term isolateral. Isolateral means that you're using two sides of your body at the same time, but that each side is using an independent source of resistance. So an example of this might be if you're going to do a triceps push down, you could do it with a rope, which would be considered bilateral because you're sharing the same load with both sides of your body. Or you could do it isolateral, where you're actually using two different cables and you're crossing them over and doing a cross cable triceps extension. So isolateral is a term that's basically just bilateral with individual loads per the different sides, whereas bilateral refers to a scenario in which you're sharing the load. Now, in the context of this video, I'm pretty much just going to stick to unilateral and bilateral because isolateral to me in many instances is kind of the same as bilateral. All right, so now to dive into more specifics, I want to start by talking about unilateral training and when and why you might want to pick unilateral options. So the first and probably most relevant reason, in my estimation, is comfort. If you're not comfortable doing a two-arm or bilateral option, oftentimes using a unilateral alternative can be a really great way to make that exercise more comfortable and more specific to one side of your body. This is especially relevant for those of you who maybe played sports growing up, who created strong asymmetries on either side of your body. For example, me personally, I played baseball for over 10 years and I threw right-handed. Potentially as a consequence of that, the different sides of my body developed different bone structures. I mean, literally left to right, if you're a kid and you're performing asymmetrical activities all the time, it's not unlikely that your bones on left and right sides are actually shaped differently. And even if you didn't play sports or you weren't involved in highly asymmetric activities, all human beings are asymmetrical. A vast majority of you are probably right-handed or left-handed and not ambidextrous. And even if you are ambidextrous, you likely have preferences on either side in terms of what you like to do with either side of your body. Some of you may like to brush your teeth left-handed. Some of you may swing a golf club right-handed, right? The point is just that human beings from the inside out are asymmetrical creatures. Your left and right brains are not the same. The intestines on the left and the right side of the body are not the same. Your diaphragm on the left side and the right side are totally different. Your heart, for example, is positioned slightly to the left side of your body. So all these things are basically just to say you're an asymmetrical organism, and that's actually not a problem. And in many instances, people make this asymmetry a problem when it actually isn't one. So all this just to say it's totally normal to have subtle differences between sides of your body, subtle differences in range of strength and mobility and where you're actually comfortable doing each exercise. And so what that might mean is that if you're doing a bilateral exercise and one side is comfortable and one side isn't, it might just be more sensible for you to do a unilateral option in that same exact pattern so that you can make the exercise more specific and more comfortable to either side of your body. And I'll repeat, there's nothing wrong with this whatsoever. It's a normal feature of human existence, and we shouldn't treat it like it's a problem unless you're actually having strong degrees of pain or, instances where one side is so dramatically stronger than the other that it's actually affecting your overall daily life, or just two arm, two leg exercises that you're trying to do symmetrically but really can't at all. So what might be some examples of making an exercise more comfortable for a given side? Well, imagine that you're comparing two options, a fixed bar triceps pushdown compared to a unilateral single arm D handle pushdown. With the fixed bar, yeah, you can move your arms inward and outward, but you really have a choice to grab underhand or overhand. And once your hands are in that position, they're fixed. Even if you grab a rope where you can rotate your palms and your hands a little bit, your hands together are still constrained within some degree to the point where you're not going to be able to individualize the exercise to either side. Whereas with the single arm D handle option, you could change the position of rotation of your arm. You could change the position of rotation of your palm the entire time. You could move the cable a little bit more across your body, right? So your arm is maybe coming more across and maybe that's more comfortable. Or you could do the opposite and you could angle it farther forward. You could step in front of the cable. You can step behind the cable. You can do all these different things because now you've opened up more space, more room to not only change ranges of motion, but also change the position of the cable relative to your body and the one side, or both sides rather, individually that make more sense for either side. So that's just one example of many that may make unilateral training in that instance more beneficial and more appropriate for you. Another example of this might be, instead of doing a two-arm pull down, you do a single arm pull down. Why? Well, because now instead of the arms having to kind of mirror one another, one of the arms could maybe pull slightly wider if it's more comfortable there, or slightly more narrow. With a D handle pull down instead of a fixed bar, you can now change the rotation of your forearm and also the direction that your arm is headed. So in addition to changing sort of where you actually pull, you could change the relationship between you and the cable, much like we talked about with the triceps extension. Again, you still want to be doing a similar enough exercise between sides. You don't want to be doing one pull down that's really wide and the other that's really narrow, right? So within reason, you make these subtle adjustments, and that can really, really make a huge difference in the outcome of someone's experience of an exercise. And the beautiful part about this is that you don't have to just pick the unilateral option. You can do some unilateral and some bilateral if you're concerned about doing too much of one or the other. Okay, so reason number 2, stability demands. This may come as a little bit of a shock to some of you, but using two parts of your body is generally stronger than using one part of your body. So for example, if you're doing a leg extension and you're doing it two legs at the same time, you're probably going to be able to lift maybe twice as much load as compared to if you used one leg at a time. And now some of you might think that there's maybe no difference in terms of the actual mechanics of the motion of a leg extension, and you would be right? It's not like doing one leg is drastically different in the ways that we discuss with the triceps extension, right? Because in either case, your leg is just bending and straightening and you're sitting down. But the thing that really does change are the stability demands associated with using one leg in that instance as compared to two. So for example, if I'm using 200 pounds with two legs, that is 200 pounds that is trying to pull me up out of the seat as I go through the leg extension. Whereas if I do half that amount with one leg, I use 100 pounds, now all of a sudden I have literally half the stability challenge in that exercise. Now, some of you may not have any stability problems on a leg extension, but think about other instances where this might come up. For example, if you're doing a two-arm pull down, let's say with a V bar, and the weight is getting really, really heavy, a lot of times what happens is the tax and the stress on your abs actually becomes almost more challenging than the pull down motion itself. I know for me personally, when I get super heavy on V-bar pull downs in particular, my abs have to do a lot of stabilization work in the pull down, whereas when I opt for a single arm where I'm using roughly maybe half that load, it's much easier for me to actually hold my trunk in position. So even though the force between those two variations might be slightly different, i.e. the two-arm force is a little bit different than the one-arm force because the one-arm force is trying to bend my spine in a way that the two-arm isn't, right? Even though there are those subtle differences in terms of the motions we could describe, the bigger picture point is that when you use one side as compared to two in an instance like that, you only have half the amount of load to challenge the stability of your body, which is to say that only half the amount of load is really trying to move you out of the isolated position that you're trying to fix your body in. And so there are many instances in which this could be tremendously beneficial, not just from an overall output standpoint, right, targeting the right muscles instead of having to focus on stabilizing the rest of your body, but also from a motor learning perspective. Overall, the point is just this. If you're using one arm as opposed to two, there's less total load on the rest of your body, which makes it easier to stabilize those motions, generally speaking. And so that can really help people and benefit people when they're trying to figure out how to really isolate a target muscle to keep the rest of their body still. Reason number 3 relates to muscle specific and range of motion adjustments. So think about a muscle like the rear delts. How are you going to fully stretch your rear delts? Well, the way that you would do it is you would take your arm and you would drag it all the way across your body, right? You would take your arm and stretch it out in front of you, almost like you're grabbing your opposite side ear. And when you do that, you have to do that, obviously, with one arm. You can't do it with two arms because your arms just run into each other. So when we're considering unilateral options for certain muscle groups can actually only get to their fully lengthened positions when you're doing them one arm at a time. So much like the rear delts, the middle delts, for example, might best stretch when the arm is pulled slightly across the body, which you can't really do with two arms at the same time unless they're asymmetric, in which case that ends up being a little bit of a weird coordination challenge. So certain motions in certain muscle groups will benefit from unilateral training completely unrelated to the reasons we've discussed so far, in that if you want to challenge certain muscles through their full ranges of contraction, you might only be able to do that with one arm or one leg at a time. For example, if you wanted to fully stretch out the side glutes, you would need to do it with one leg at a time because you can't bring your leg across your body or hinge inward toward your leg with two at the same time. Another good example of when a unilateral option can be really beneficial for training a specific muscle in a specific range might be a split squat, right? What happens with the back leg of a split squat? Well, what you're able to do is you're able to train the quads in a fully knee bent and hip extended position. What that means is that you're able to actually get your leg behind your body and use your quads in that position, which is very rare to do in the context of traditional gym exercises. So for instance, when you do a leg extension, you're bringing your legs up in front of your body and you're kicking against the shin pad, which will train the quads in a relatively more shortened muscle length. But to be able to get your leg all the way behind your body with two legs at the same time, you would need to do something like this. That's like a hack squat, sissy squat, or anything similar, which can be really challenging to coordinate and learn for some people. And also just sometimes it's like impossible for some people just to lift the weight of a sled if the sled on a leg press or a hack squat is really heavy. So doing something like a split squat can allow you to train the fully stretched position of what we would call the rectus femoris muscle. Whereas if you were trying to do that two legs at the same time, you might have to do it in a scenario that's just really uncomfortable and clunky to you. And not to mention the fact that your front leg is getting a little bit of a different stimulus. So if you pick a unilateral option like a split squat or even a lunge, you have the opportunity to actually work different muscles and different muscle lengths because you're able to put your legs in very different positions front to back. Now, another consideration for why you might want to use unilateral training is just simply that it's sometimes a lot more practical for someone to learn and coordinate and exercise when you're doing it one arm or one leg at the same time. Just in general, I think about this in the most simple way, which is it's probably easier to focus on one thing in most cases as opposed to two things. So for instance, if you're trying to teach someone how to do a really solid, isolated, proper biceps curl, although it's not the most challenging motion to actually learn how to perform, and some of you may think this is overcomplication, doing it one arm at a time can be easier than doing it two arms at a time, separate from all the reasons we've even discussed so far related to comfort and range of motion adjustment. Just simply focusing on one biceps at a time can make it less daunting for people to figure out how to actually do things like manage fatigue and keep the rest of their body still under that fatigue, and to continue to actually push the range of motion and push the challenge one arm at a time is just overall less pain. If both of my biceps are on fire when I'm doing a curl, it's probably a little bit easier to manage that sense of pain and that mental challenge if I'm doing it one arm at a time. At least many of my clients personally have benefited from that. So just beyond all the other considerations, it might be actually easier for someone to learn a motion and then progress a motion, which is to say add weight, add reps, or both over time, specifically because it's just a little bit easier for them to figure out. So aside from the other reasons, which may of course overlap with this one, sometimes progression ability and the ability to learn an exercise can be easier unilateral as compared to bilateral. Now, of course, there are instances in which the opposite might be true. Like someone might have a much easier time learning how to press with two arms at the same time as compared to one arm, right? Because when you press with a single arm, now the stability bands go way, way up. So for all these reasons that I'm giving, there are exceptions and there are instances in which these things wouldn't apply, but hopefully overall, in large part, these are generalizations that can apply to unilateral training. So another example might be that it could be easier for someone to learn how to do squats two legs at the same time before using a unilateral option like a split squat, because the balancing component of a split squat is just inherently a little bit more difficult. Again, that doesn't remove any of the other benefits of the split squat, but in certain instances, there are trade-offs that are additionally worth considering. But to go over every exercise scenario wouldn't be practical here. So I hope it's enough just to say that all these things that I'm saying are generalized principles, which may or may not apply in fine detail across specific exercises and specific exercise comparisons. All right, so the last one before I get into the potential downsides of unilateral training relates to self-assistance and something I like to call masochistic training. So think about it this way. If you're doing, let's say, a biceps curl and you're doing it two arms at the same time, let's say you're doing a cable curl. You get to the end of that set, there's only so much you can cheat that exercise. You can kind of like maybe try to swing your arms forward, the more fatigue that you get to try to get some extra reps or whatever. But there's no way to create a kind of self-assistance in the way that you can when you're doing it one arm at a time. Why? Well, because when you're using one arm, you can literally use your opposite hand to assist that working arm as it gets fatigued and as it goes through the range of motion. And so with a single arm curl option, as you dig more and more and more into fatigue, if you're someone who really likes to get the most out of every single set that you're doing, maybe you want to like decrease your total session time, the amount of sets that you're doing, you can make each individual set that much harder by actually self-assisting the curl when you can no longer get it up in the concentric way. So as I'm going to a top of a curl, I can no longer get that at some point, but I can continue to do the eccentric or negative portion. So you get to a point in the range where it's like you can't actually lift it yourself, but you can lift it with the opposite hand in addition to your attempt to curl, and then you can lower it in isolation. You could even get to a point where you're assisting yourself on the lowering portion. Now, is that necessary? Is it absolutely the best thing to do in most scenarios? Probably not, right? But it is a feature of unilateral training that exists that doesn't exist at all in most bilateral options. So that's just another one to consider. It's probably more niche and more rare, but it is true that in a unilateral setting like that, like a curl or extension, or generally speaking, just lighter exercise options, you can, on average, I think, dig deeper into sets if you use your opposite hand or your opposite leg. So in the context of a leg extension or something like a lying leg curl, you could do the curl with two legs and then you could lower it with one, right? So that's a kind of bilateral, unilateral blend, but just things to consider, right? Which is just that you could add additional stress to a single limb by using the other limb to assist you in parts of the range of motion that are more challenging that the one limb on its own couldn't handle. And that may or may not be something that benefits you if it's a style that you enjoy. If you've never tried it before, definitely give it a try if you feel confident in trying to do it, and just see how you like it, because there are certain days where I'm just like, I want to dig a little bit deeper today, and that's something that's pretty fun to do on occasion. So what are the downsides of unilateral training, which is really just to say, what are the trade-offs, right? Rather than thinking of upsides and downsides, just think of trade-offs here. So when we do unilateral training, obviously we have to do both sides individually. So there can be some instances in which doing unilateral training makes your training session longer. But I think people generally haven't thought through this really thoroughly, because this doesn't apply in all cases. So let me give an example. If I'm doing single arm biceps curls, right, on either side, so I have to go back and forth. If I'm doing the curls one arm at a time, most people just assume, oh, I'm doing twice as many sets, so it will take twice as much time. But if you actually break it down and do the math, that assumes that you're fully resting between either side. And personally speaking, when I do unilateral exercises, I use one side's working set as the other side's rest. So if I'm doing curls, what I'll do is I'll do my first set on my right side, let's say, or whatever it happens to be, and then I just immediately go to the other side. Now, as soon as I start my other side set, my other arm is already resting, right? I don't need to fatigue my opposite arm in any way in order to do the main curl on the other side. And so as the other side is working, the other side is resting, and vice versa. And so for me personally, I don't really add any total session time, because what I'm doing is I'm just going back and forth between sides, right? If I rested fully between either side, which I think in most cases is totally unnecessary, then yeah, I would be doubling the length of the session potentially, but I just go back and forth. Now, when you are supersetting exercises, so if you're someone who likes to do a lot of supersetting, then you're putting yourself in a position where, yes, you will be adding additional time to a session by definition, because of the fact that if you're doing, let's say, one option that is two arm and then the second option is single arm, instead of just being able to go back and forth like we talked about between sides on the unilateral thing, what you have to do is you have to do exercise A, which let's say is two arm, and then you have to do one set and then another set on the unilateral side. So because you can't just use that same strategy of one exercise's work as the other exercise's rest, now you actually do have to add a little bit of extra time in total with the unilateral training option that is connected with a bilateral option in the context of a superset. So if you are someone who likes to superset, on average, unilateral training will be something that adds a little bit of time to your session. How much, of course, will depend on how much you rest and just how long you take between sides, really, and how many reps you're doing. But overall, I don't think that the whole time addition situation is really a huge problem in many instances. I do find that people say things like, oh, it takes so much extra time. A lot of times those people just seem to be people who are repeating and regurgitating what others are saying. In my experience, doing unilateral options on a couple of exercises every session really doesn't make a huge difference to total session length. Now, again, like anything else, this concept may not apply to all unilateral options. So in the same way that I said, okay, I can do one biceps curl and the other, and I can kind of use one side's work for the other side's rest, you probably don't want to do that with something like a split squat. Now, a split squat technically isn't the truest form of a unilateral option, right? Because you are still planting both legs and using muscles on either leg. So it's kind of like an asymmetric bilateral option, if you want to call it that. So in true unilateral options, like single leg this, single leg that, the other leg isn't doing anything, or the other arm isn't doing anything in the context of a single arm thing, those are options where you can just bounce back and forth. But if you're doing a split squat or like a Cossack squat, or basically just anything where the other side of your body has to stabilize or do a significant amount of work, then yeah, you're not going to be able to bounce back and forth between legs. And so in those instances, yeah, you have to add extra time. But on the flip side, you could do something like a walking lunge or a reverse lunge where you're just alternating sides, and that might not add any time. So it really does depend on the specific variation. And I hope just spelling out the principles on a bigger level can help you sort of analyze individual scenarios to a more nuanced degree. Now, overall, I did mention some other downsides throughout the rest of this video already, such as unilateral training training, sometimes the asymmetric load might be more difficult to stabilize, right? So for example, if you're trying to teach someone how to do a split squat or a lunge before doing a two-legged squat, that might be something that they struggle with. But I think that is a really, really case-specific thing. So sometimes unilateral training options can be harder to learn, but on average, if you're doing them, really truly single-sided in stable environments, they tend not to be overall, at least in my experience and in the experience of the people that I've worked with. Ultimately, unilateral options are not good or bad. They're not better or worse than bilateral options. They just offer a few unique things that bilateral options do not, and vice versa, right? So there are certain bilateral exercises that offer opportunities that unilateral options do not. Sometimes it can be simply just saving a little bit of time or just doing an exercise that does something pretty much similar, but just in a way that might feel better or more balanced or whatever it happens to be, right? So for example, is the single arm cable press ever really going to be a great option compared to just doing it two arms at the same time? Probably not, or in some instances it may be, but in most instances probably not. If you enjoyed this video, you will love all the content on my website, so check the link in the description below to see all my products. Thank you for watching, and if you know someone who you think will benefit from this video, please copy paste the link and send it to them.